Point A to point B to point C, especially with the wind blowing. Yeah, we do stop and put up on something.
My 3-year-old said when they put them up, he goes, "I decorated the signs for Christmas."
Are we thinking of signing again?
And they still don't stop at all of them.
No.
That's the demo.
Yep. I did, but
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Just a couple of procedural things that I need to do before I listen to what everybody has to say. Curriculum night occurred on December 2nd, and were all the grievances submitted to Ms. Libas on December 3rd?
I believe so.
And the principal did reply on December 12th, and the grievances were received in the superintendent's office on December 18th. Is there going to be a spokesperson for the group, or?
Good morning.
Okay. Ms. Luke.
We filed our grievances because we were told to prepare and present for curriculum night at Prairie Rose Elementary on December 2nd, 2014. We feel that adequate compensation in the form of consecutive block of time is needed. That's why it's differentiated between the classroom teachers asking for a half day of personal time or pay, and specialists ask for 90 minutes. We believe that curriculum night was required by the district. Our thoughts on this were confirmed when DEA contacted you and asked for more information, and your response is you needed clarification from Mrs. Catherine. So ultimately, we were asked to be inside our classrooms, outside of our contracted time, and we're asking for consecutive compensation for that.
Okay. Was there ever any discussion about why I had to visit with Mrs. Catherine?
For clarification on our required attendance is what we were.
Why would Mrs. Catherine be the person I would ask?
Because it was a district initiative, is what we assumed.
Okay. The reason why I had to visit with Mrs. Catherine is because the information that I was given is that was discussed by the building principals, the elementary principals, at an elementary principal meeting, and Mrs. Catherine chairs that committee, or that meeting. And so that's why I had to visit with her, because I do not attend those very often. Okay. Just so that everybody's aware. If I don't pass around enough, let me know if there's extras. Just put them in the table, please. These are the minutes from the April 24th, 2013 collaborative bargaining meeting between the DEA and the school board. I'll give you all an opportunity to read those. As you can all see, the curriculum night was a topic of discussion between the board and the DEA. And ultimately, what the conclusion that they came to during the discussion on April 24th, 2013, was that the flex time would be the solution, working with the building principal.
Now, are minutes something that's binding to all employees?
These minutes were approved by both the DEA and the school board, and so they represent what transpired at the meeting and what the parties agreed to. And what the parties agreed to during negotiations is binding.
How come it didn't make it into the negotiated agreement?
That I can't answer. But the question that I would have is, even if it's not in the negotiated agreement, what would be the ethical thing for the administration to do?
Give consecutive flex time. If I work consecutive hours, I have to do flex, right?
That's not what this says, and that's a great point, Mrs. Campbell. You know, I appreciate the input, but my question is, what would be the ethical thing for the administration to do, even if it didn't get into the negotiated agreement?
Well, I have page 5 of these minutes. This is page 6. And here it says, in regards to curriculum night, that it would not be a requirement for the next school year. It says, Mr. Reap responded that the district could not get rid of literacy night, but could get rid of curriculum night. Mr. Reap said literacy night was required as a part of a Title I mandate. Dr. Sullivan was asked to find out if curriculum night was a requirement. He left to consult with Mrs. Catherine. Dr. Sullivan reported that it was undecided at this time if curriculum night was going to be a requirement to the next school year.
Right?
Yeah. So, as I read this, that it's not a requirement, and it didn't make it into the negotiated agreement, and 60 employees agree with me.
But the question I have is, the agreement between the parties was that flex time would be utilized. And my question is, what would be the ethical thing for the administration to do, even if it didn't get into the negotiated agreement? I would just like an answer to that question.
Well,
What should we ethically do?
This discussion needed to continue because it just says flex time. There's no specific amount. There's no, when can that be used? And the discussion we've had at our school is being able to leave at 3:15 after school is almost, it's nice, and I'm glad that there was some kind of compensation thought of. However, the reality is hardly anybody can really leave at 3:15. It's not, you just can't. You have students in your room sometimes until 3:30 even, and if we have people that are in charge of hallways, they're not leaving until 3:40, or it's really hard to use those, to find a time that even could be used. And so we're just saying it's more it's more useful to us if we could have like a half a day that we could use somewhere to attend something of our children, or to go to a doctor's appointment, whereas that 3:15, it's just really, it's hard to get out of there.
Yep, and those are great points, and I appreciate that input. But just a couple of comments. The conversation did end there, and whether it needs to go on is a separate topic for the DEA and the school board to talk about at some point in time. And so I still would like to have an answer about how should the administration deal with it in an ethical manner, even if it's not in the negotiated agreement.
Well, what is in the negotiated agreement is our contracted time is 8 to 3:45.
Okay? But my question is, how should I deal with it ethically? Given the record that both parties agreed to, how should I deal with it in an ethical manner?
Ethical and equitable too, across the district?
I'm just asking, how should I deal with it ethically? A point wants to be made that it's not in the negotiated agreement. I can't explain why that didn't happen, other than the parties did not talk about putting it in a negotiated agreement. There was no discussion about putting it in writing. The discussion was about having the teachers work with the principals. And so how should I deal with it in an ethical manner?
to be compensated in a block of time, like that we were expected to serve. We as employees, that's why we're here, because we followed the negotiated agreement. As an employee, I'm not at every DEA meeting. I'm not at every one of these to look at minutes. I go by what I believe is the document that was negotiated and agreed upon between parties. And that's why we're here, for you to rectify that and say, yeah, that's true. That was the contracted time that they're supposed to be. Those are those parameters. They were required to be out there outside of time, and you should be compensated for it. Flex time is a great convenience, but I myself, I can't get out of there between at least 3:40 is the earliest. I have students in my room every day until at least 3:30. 7-year-olds are kind of pokey, especially in the winter time, and I feel a great responsibility to make sure that they're all safe before they leave the school. And it's very important to serve my students before myself. So flex time is a great convenience for some employees, but not for me. The thing that I think is unfair is that we were required to put in a lot of extra time, and weekly I donate a lot of time and money to this district of my own choosing. This was not my choice.
Well, and I feel too like kind of a boundary was crossed a little bit. Like this was an extra time, like outside of contract time, and yet we did have staff that were told if you don't come, you have to take personal time. So then that is part of our contracted. Do you see what I'm saying? Like this curriculum night was not part of a contract, but yet if you have to take personal time to not attend, that is something that's in your contracted time. That should come out of your contracted hours, you know, so your personal time then is lost.
Clarify for me the personal time, and then I'll come back to another question.
Well, one of our staff members had a prior commitment that was made months in advance and was unable to attend, and that person was told they would have to take personal time out of their leave time if they couldn't attend this curriculum night event. And so that kind of crossed that boundary.
So what was the ultimate result?
She did not attend, and
she did not have to take the personal time, but that decision I don't think was conveyed until a couple days before the event.
Because
so there was no personal time required.
Right, but at that point we were just really unsure about how this all was going to work. If this isn't contracted time, how can we lose our personal time for that?
Well, nobody did, as far as I know. And if somebody did, then I will explore that. So, to come back to my question, am I hearing that ethically the administration should not ignore what the minutes say, even if it didn't get into the negotiated agreement?
I think ethically we should be compensated time where it's all together instead of just 15-minute tickets.
I understand that, and I appreciate those comments.
I have a couple questions, Dr. Sullivan.
I would like, well,
okay.
I'd be happy to answer those, Mr. Smith, but I just would like an answer to my question. What should the administration, even if it doesn't get into the negotiated agreement, ethically should I ignore it? Or ethically, should I implement what is represented in the minutes as what the parties agreed to?
I think ultimately that is your decision. You're the boss. And I don't think any one of us at the table would feel comfortable giving an opinion that would represent an entire district. I mean, that's what we're here for, and ultimately you're right. That is your decision, and that's your cross to bear. I'm sorry, but
well, let me explore that, please, Mr. Smith, just a little bit. I don't recall that I asked anybody in this room to represent the entire district. What I'm discussing is the grievance that I have in front of me, okay? And so, in an instance when it doesn't get into the negotiated agreement, there are really two choices that I have. I either ignore it and say, well, too bad, so sad, or I implement what the parties agreed to. Now, my question is, which one should I pick?
But realistically, the parties didn't agree to a specific amount, so there
That's
has
true.
to be a decision made either way. You know, how much flex time is reasonable, that kind of has to be up to you. So the reality is, nothing was totally set in stone in these minutes either. That wasn't agreed. So I think that decision is still out there. You know, do we decide at this meeting what is an appropriate amount of this flex time? Can it be taken consecutively? Because it doesn't really say anything about that. Could it be in a chunk? It doesn't say that it can or can't, you know. And could it be, so then if we're gonna be making some changes, we could make that change too, that says a half a day of personal time, because it's,
I
nothing
wonder
was
too,
decided.
excuse me, I wonder too, with this being a curriculum initiative, that it shouldn't be across the district, not just elementary, but 6th grade, 7th grade, and high school. And I think that's what some of us feel too, the elementary. We're usually putting in all those extra hours outside of class time for things like this, the literacy night and this curriculum night now. And I think that's part of how we feel as well, that it isn't quite fair.
Yeah, that it always starts with
That always-
us, with the elementary.
And we have, you know, all of us, we all do, we all donate so much extra time for our kids.
Can I
And
just,
that's an important point, and I've heard that from other buildings also, and I appreciate those comments. But what I have to work with are the minutes in front of me. And Mrs. Bechtold, you made some good points, and I will keep those in mind as I take a look at this issue and how to deal with it. But in terms of my question, I have two choices. Even though there is some ambiguity, I have two choices. One is to either ignore it and say, well, it didn't get in a negotiated agreement, so you don't get anything. Or one is to implement what the parties agreed to. Now my question is, which one is the ethical decision?
if you, so you are saying that you agree that they are entitled to flex time if you honor this agreement, as you're stating?
I'm stating that that's what the minutes reflect.
So
That the
you're agreeing that they-
building principals would work with the teachers to provide flex time for the curriculum night.
So you're saying then that they are entitled to flex time if you look at this?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, can I have an answer to my question?
Well, you seem to be, it's
No,
kind of like a
just-
take it or
I would
leave
just like a
it.
simple answer to my question. It's just a simple, it's a simple question.
I think we're
It is a simple
uncomfortable with
question.
that because I'm afraid we're being hung out by minutes from a meeting a year and a half ago that we didn't know. Like, I don't know as just a regular employee that these minutes exist and I have to abide by them. They're not published, they're not on a website. It would have been nice prior to this, because questions were raised before the night existed, that we have these minutes that you agreed to, if that's what we were going to be hung out with. I think we're uncomfortable with answering that question is we don't want to say something and then flex time disappears. We get half-day personal days and all these employees are left twisting in the wind. I don't agree with that.
That's definitely not a win-win for anybody.
Right. I think I think what is for certain is our contracted time is 8 to 3:45. We're required to work and plan for lessons outside of that time. And just like we are for conferences, we are compensated for that. I believe that if we do get flex time, it should be in a consecutive block of time, as
I
we're
understand
required
that.
to serve.
I understand that.
The ethical question is, I think it's a gray area, and that's why we're here, for you to cut through that.
What's the gray area
It's,
about my question?
this is
This
ambiguous, you know, and
Okay, let me.
you
well,
have to bring light to what needs to be done to solve this problem.
And
Okay.
is flex time, the real definition of flex time, does that have to be that 3:15 to 3:45? Is that the only thing covered by this flex time? you know, what is the definition of flex time? Was kind of, because this was the first that I had heard of it was on this
Yes.
sheet, so I really
Let me-
wasn't sure about
let me-
flex time.
Let me try and address a couple of things, okay? The first question about having the minutes in advance, these minutes were given out, not to you, but to DEA leadership. I assumed that they would be distributed to the district, and they were not, in advance of curriculum night, to try and help bring some understanding. Now, did I specifically ask that they be distributed? No. And perhaps I shouldn't have assumed that, but I did provide these minutes to DEA leadership.
With this, was this
Okay.
highlighted?
Yes, it was. It was exactly this document. And in terms of what was agreed to, it clearly states, Mrs. Schubert said that it looks like the solution would be flex time. Mr. Gray asked for clarification. What he was hearing is that flex time sounds like the best solution. Chair Fair noted that it appeared the team had a solution with a tentative agreement. And so just to go back to my question, between the two choices that I have, which one is the ethical approach?
Offer flex time in a consecutive block.
To offer flex time
In
at a
con-
minimum.
In a consecutive block.
This doesn't say that. I'm not saying that can't be done, okay? I'm not saying it can't be done, but this doesn't specifically say consecutive time.
It does, however, say time outside the work schedule, and our work schedule goes till 3:45. So if I read this, am I incorrect with that? That does not mean after 3:45 the flex times? I mean, outside the work schedule, so what additional time is given to us outside our work schedule? Ms. Ross said that additional time outside, oh, she's saying it's outside your
She said that
work
additional
hours is when you can get them, okay.
What is the definition of flex time?
The definition that was discussed and how it would operate is that the teachers would work with the building principals, according to the.
There is no district-wide definition,
There is not.
so it varies from principal.
Yeah, it would be the principals and teachers working in collaboration.
And this
Just-
contract was imposed, correct? Was this the contract that was imposed, Dr. Sullivan?
This was the contract that was ordered by the court.
Imposed by the school district, and then consequently ordered by the court. And then we negotiated again for the 14-15. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Smith.
And unfortunately, this didn't get into the 14-15 contract either. Correct?
That is correct.
So, by your question, I guess I look at it, so if the shoe were on the other foot, and it is frequently that the shoe is on the other foot, and I can't think of a time, I guess, where somebody said, it's not in your negotiated agreement, but, you know, most of the time it goes back to, this is what the negotiated agreement says. And that's comfort in both sides. I mean, I know what is expected of me by what is written in black and white. So I can go to that. And the other side the same, correct? So this time, this particular instance, it's a school district. It didn't get into the negotiated agreement in the school district. I don't know how or why, but the school district has a discrepancy with what happened. But the next time it could be a member of the DEA that has some issue, and it's not in the negotiated agreement, and then the school district would say, what is the ethical thing to do? And your answer would then be what?
Mr. Smith, I'm not going to sit here and play hypotheticals
Well-
on situations that I can't even deal with. Since
I agree.
There are no facts presented to me about how to respond. But all I know is the minutes said this is what would happen, and I know that the parties did not discuss that it needed to be put into writing.
But then they
The
did
other
not have it.
items-
They didn't discuss the other tentative agreements either,
The other
Dr.
items
Sullivan.
were already in the negotiated agreement.
No, the sunset clause was taken out, correct?
It was in the negotiated agreement at the time. and then it was removed.
Okay, and the change to profession, or the, what was it, what'd you have at the end of, there was about 3 or 4 things that were actually.
Compensation for sick leave.
Sorry,
It
yep,
was a school board policy,
correct.
so that was already in place, in writing. And the parties did not specifically discuss that this needed to be put into writing. Parties discussed that the building principals would work with the teachers. But there's one other issue that I just need to put a little bit of clarification on. This is the negotiated agreement, and it does talk about the school day. And it says, under 5B, number 1, school day for teachers will normally be 8 to 3:45. However, variations to this time schedule will be made by the building principal to meet all necessary contingencies.
And I guess that's where that curriculum is curriculum night a necessary contingency? Because in that other note, it said that we could get rid of curriculum night, so that's.
And if it is necessary, shouldn't it be necessary across the board for all, not just elementary?
I guess what worries me a little bit is when it's done in the past, you just are expected to keep doing it. So, okay, we do this, and now pretty soon we're gonna throw another one of these for you. And, well, you didn't have a problem with the last one, so why can't you do another one? And then we're gonna put another one on top of it. Well, you didn't have a problem, and now it's past practice, so here's another one for you.
Absolutely, it's
Just-
about setting that precedent.
Right.
And back to school night, I mean, we all attend that as well.
I have a second job, so coming in and working other things that's difficult for me. I couldn't work the Tuesday night, so I lost out on my extra pay.
And, you know, these are all great points, and I do appreciate those comments. As I suggested yesterday, and as I suggested prior to the grievances being filed, perhaps what would be helpful would be for building leaders, whoever you would select, to sit down with either myself and the principals, or myself and Mrs. Catherine, or myself and Mrs. Catherine and the principals, and try and get some of these issues out so we understood everything. And there was actually some suggestions that were made yesterday that I thought would be really worth exploring to try and eliminate some of the frustration that exists. And as I said yesterday, the administration is quite willing to do that so that we can try and eliminate these difficulties.
I guess the attendance issue with curriculum night is an issue too. I don't feel like our attendance of parents has been a great deal, and I agree totally that we need to get parents involved and they need to be interacting with the teachers and the students, but I don't feel like we're reaching that, and I feel like there's probably a better way to do that. Perhaps open house night would be great. At my grade level that I teach, we do open house, and the next day it's the exact same thing. We want a picture with you, the next day it's the same thing. And it's really hard on that open house night to reach all of those parents. Some of them you completely miss. That would be, to me, a fabulous night for curriculum night. You catch them at the beginning, you reach them all. We do it all at one building, we get it all done across the board.
And I appreciate those comments, and that those are the type of things that I said, as I said, that would be worth exploring and discussing to try and move forward in a constructive manner.
And Dr. Sullivan, you and I had no less than 2 or 3 meetings, visits, I don't know what you want to call them, and we discussed this extensively. And this is when you did share it with me. But this was before you gave the directive to continue. You could have not had it like we did the year before, and then went through the process like you're talking about to iron all the wrinkles out before you continued with it. And that's my frustration, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
I would just like to add my frustration as well, because I know there were several other staff members that had similar frustrations. I don't have family in town. I have young children, so I actually lost money attending curriculum night, because on top of that, I had to pay daycare for my children who were young, and I didn't feel it would be appropriate for them to attend. And I just know that other staff members had that same issue.
Okay, thank you.
And one other issue we kind of had at our building was the principals gave that scripted Common Core PowerPoint to read, and the parents were specifically told there are no questions to be asked, you can write them down. But then the parents left there, and mind you, ours had a ton of sixth grade information in it, which we don't have sixth graders, and neither did any of the other elementary schools. And then they came back to our rooms, and we got hammered from parents. Well,
About Common
I
Core.
just felt like that we kind of were put between a rock and a hard place, because we weren't really told we were addressing Common Core at the curriculum night, but principals were. So was it to teach parents about Common Core, or were we there to teach them about curriculum, or was this a way to just kill two birds with one stone? I don't know.
Right, it felt thrown upon us
Right.
because, you know, like you were saying, we needed to have some planning, and that would have been great, I think, if as a staff we could have worked out how it could have played out, and instead of being here's what you're going to do kind of thing, you know, we would have liked to have had our input maybe on what days work for us, so that people could work out their jobs or their child care or whatever. But there was no, you know, we weren't asked, we were just told, and I think that was kind of,
I think we all just felt taken advantage of a little bit. And not respected as professionals who have lives and other things, and not respected in the fact that we all give our time. You know, I live across the street from the school,
I know that.
and that parking lot's never empty, and I know because sometimes I feel a lot of guilt looking at it and being home. But I know how much myself and my colleagues put in, and how much we value our jobs and what we do, and how much it's really a part of us inside. But there is a line, and I feel with this we needed to put a period at the end and say, no, we need to feel like our time that is valued outside of work as well. And that we shouldn't just be put upon us that you're going to prepare a lesson, you're going to be teaching to students, you're going to have to be here from our parents from this time to this time. We just felt it was unfair.
Okay, thank you.
And I think back to the ethical question, I think it's ambiguous, and it's for you to decide how that flex time would be distributed.
Well, my only question is, should I respect the flex time, even though it's undefined? Should I respect what the minutes represent, or should I ignore those?
I think you can respect them.
Okay.
I mean,
that's all I'm
because
asking.
you're right.
I don't believe you're confined to those two decisions. I don't believe those are the only two options. I think you, as a superintendent, can do what you want, or find an avenue to satisfy all.
And like Mr. Smith had stated, a negotiated agreement has come out since this point. It should have made it into there, and it's unfortunate that it didn't, but that leaves the question, how many old minutes are we going to be respecting? You know, how many meetings are we going to be looking at? And you know what I'm saying? If a negotiated agreement came out after this, if it's something that we were going to follow, it should have made it in there.
Well, that would be something to discuss with your negotiators.
Well, and I believe that it will be.
Yes.
Now, this was from the 2013-2014 negotiations. But that year, they did not have curriculum night, right?
Right.
It did not occur in 2013-14,
So
that is correct.
what is talked about here was not even followed at that point.
Right, right.
If they didn't have it, then why would, this be binding?
Parties didn't discuss that it was mandatory to conduct a curriculum night.
No, but you're saying that these are the minutes we're abiding by, but yet they did not follow through with them even in 2013, 2014 and have curriculum night.
Parties didn't discuss the curriculum night was mandatory.
No.
Right, but what you're saying is if this was for that year and
Yeah.
we didn't bother doing
Yeah.
it, then why would this be binding
Why
for
would
the
that carry
following
over?
year?
Yes.
Yeah.
Why would the flex time be binding
Well,
for the following year?
just this
Curriculum
discussion
night.
in general, I think if it was held for that 13-14 year, but we didn't do curriculum night, then why does this kind of carry over to the 14-15 year? You know, it wasn't binding for 13-14, so why is it binding for 14-15?
Had there been curriculum night in 13-14, it would have been. I mean, flex time would have been the solution. That's what the parties discussed, was when curriculum night occurs, flex time is the solution.
Well, and I personally think that if it's in minutes and if that's the case, I think we all would want whatever is agreed upon in a meeting, whether it's to benefit either side or both, we would want that binding. And so I see what you're saying ethically if it says that, but then that decision on can it be consecutive time, then that's, then that part's up to you whether or not to be fair, because I agree with you. Once it's been agreed upon and people have agreed to that and the meeting is closed, we don't want people going back and changing these things either. That's legitimate.
And two, even if a teacher walked out at 3:15, to me, you're leaving unfinished business, and you're gonna have to go back and make that up.
Or take it home on your own
You know,
time.
so you're really not compensated. You're still working, whether you're coming back or you're taking it home or.
And at the same time, if you leave at 3:15 and you still have students, you have to give your students to somebody else to watch, and that puts more responsibility on them. And do you really want to share that responsibility with somebody else just so that you can take your flex time at 3:15?
Right.
Who's going to be watching our 5-year-olds at 3:15?
And as a professional, who does that?
Right.
Here,
Right.
I'm leaving. Flex time.
Right, because it becomes not even an issue of professional, it's,
Let's
this
see.
is what we do because we care about our kids, you
Right.
know? It's the right thing to do.
So I guess today we're asking you to do the right thing, and you have the ability to cut through this and define flex time.
Okay. Anything else? I know you all have to get going pretty soon. Well, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.